Welcome to the Nintendo Power Retrospectives. I'm Count Zero. This week we're continuing our run through the best of the rest, and we've got another 11 titles to get through. We have a couple shoot-em-ups this time, particularly of note, and also a couple movie licensed games. As with the last time, we've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. Number 22, Ikari Warriors by SNK and Micronix. Well, we have our first game in the best of the rest that has been reviewed by the Angry Video Game Nerd. Ikari Warriors could be described as SNK's attempt to put out their own version of Commando, in the same way that they later attempt to put out their own version of Street Fighter with the Art of Fighting series and the Fatal Fury series. Unfortunately, this version of the game, the NES port, isn't developed by SNK, it's developed by Micronix, a company with a track record that could best be described as utterly abysmal. This isn't helped by the fact that while the arcade version of the game had a rotary joystick that lets you move and shoot in different directions in a slightly more primitive version of Smash TV controls, the NES version moves your aim to the last direction you were moving in, and unless you're in the tank, you instead have to kind of rotate the turret by pressing the B button and moving, and that will adjust your aim in the same way that you would normally on foot. Honestly, this is a situation where the home version of the game is not only inferior to the arcade version in terms of graphics, but also in terms of control and difficulty, and I really can't recommend playing this game. Skip it. Number 21, Rambo by Acclaim and Pack-In Video. Well, this is another crappy game. This game is kind of designed as a sort of Zelda 2 style RPG, based around the events of Rambo First Blood Part 2. You play John Rambo, and as in the movie, you have to rescue a bunch of POWs and kill communists in Vietnam in various forms, including various communist insects and animals. The problem is this game is considerably more difficult to navigate than Zelda 2 is. Zelda 2 gives you a sort of transition between side-scrolling dungeon and city and cave areas, and the overworld map where you can tell where you are in relation to everything else on the world. On the other hand, though, with this game, it takes a perspective sort of like Castlevania 2, but with a more dense navigation system, as rather than just going left to right for the whole game, with occasionally going up to enter a dungeon, you navigate your way through the various sections of the game by going left to right until you find a place where you can go up, or press up to go either north or south, and then go through that area until you reach an objective, or go north or south again. It's really clunky, and while I'm not exactly against doing map making in a game, if you're going to do map making, do it in a fashion where the map making feels organic for the player to do. And I find map making for levels like this not necessarily organic. So, definitely give this game a miss. Number 20, California Games from US Gold and Epix. This is yet another game that isn't very good. It's a little like Track and Field, and that's a collection of minigames, but the controls aren't as intuitive as the controls in Track and Field are, nor is the subject matter quite as unified as they are in Track and Field, or for that matter, Skate or Die. Definitely skip this game. Number 19, Kidniki, Radical Ninja, by Data East and Irem. Kidniki is a weird game to play. The game was originally created in Japan as Kaiketsu Yanshanmaru, but had its name changed to something more 80s and removed of all its Japanese connotations, because again, this is the 80s and the US is... Well, let's just say we're back to the days where it's societally acceptable to discriminate against Japanese people. Go back to my episode on my main reviews show where I take a look at the Eric von Lustbader novel Black Blade for more about the new yellow peril we got in the 1980s in the US. Anyway, the game is fairly simple. The player runs from right to left, or the character, rather, runs from right to left. The player doesn't do that, he remains seated and using a controller. So he goes from right to left, beating up everything that gets in his way, mainly with enemies running either from the left or from the right after the character, so you have to keep attacking back and forth. And Well, it's very straightforward. It's fairly simple in the first level, and then amps up in difficulty fairly quickly once you hit the second level. Now, my main gripes for this game kind of are related to a certain degree of sloppiness and laziness in the game's programming. When you make your way through the game, what happens is once the edge of the screen hits certain trigger points, basically, it spawns an enemy. Not just one enemy, though. It keeps constantly spawning enemies until you move the screen past that trigger point. It's sort of like how in Call of Duty, when you're running up against massive waves after waves after waves of enemy coming at you until you move past a certain point in the screen, at which point the number of enemies at that spawn point stops. It's like that, except a much more primitive 8-bit version. It's sloppy, it's clumsy, and it makes the game more difficult than it really needs to be. A similar problem is with attack animations. There is no crouch attack in this game. If you're crouched and you try to attack an enemy, the character immediately reverts to the standing position to do the attack animation, which I find kind of sloppy, because by comparison, Mega Man can shoot while crouched, Ryu from Ninja Gaiden can attack while crouched, the guys from Contra can shoot while crouched. It's not like the idea of attacking while crouched doesn't exist. I mean, hell, in another of Irem's games, Kung Fu, which I reviewed last time, you can attack from a crouched position. Yet, in this game, for some reason, they decided not to encode that in there. It's disappointing, and it's sloppy. I definitely consider this game to be in the realm of not good, not terrible, kind of just fair, and definitely something that you should skip. Number 18, Solomon's Key by Tecmo. Solomon's Key is one hell of a puzzle game. Specifically, it's one of the first puzzle platformers I've reviewed thus far. Your character, Dana, has to make his or her, the character's gender is not specific, way through each stage, finding a key to unlock the exit and reach the exit. Along the way, there are optional side objectives like collecting bells, which release fairies, which in turn will give you extra lives once you collect 10 of them. And was also as part of this, there's a certain degree of resource management, as while you can basically create and remove an unlimited number of blocks, you don't have unlimited attacks. You have a maximum of 4 offensive spells you can use, and you have to be careful how you use them. Now, once you use one, the enemy you destroy doesn't reappear, but still, you have to be careful how you use it, and you need to keep in mind, okay, I need a certain number of attack spells to get through a level, which also means for earlier levels, if you don't need one, you shouldn't waste it frivolously, because you may reach a point later where you have to have one. And various other similar things. It's considered to be one of the hardest games for the NES ever made, and having played it, I definitely understand why it's considered to be so. And also, I'm even more impressed for Areno of Game Center CX for how he managed to beat this game, and impressed with his skill as a puzzle master. So this game is definitely one that requires the player to sit, take their time, and think. And because of this, I'd say it's a game that definitely is a prospective single-player pick for this episode. Number 17, Gradius by Konami. I have to say that Gradius is considerably more difficult than its spiritual and literal sequel, Life Force. Life Force has the advantage that in that game, you can enter the Konami code and get 99 lives, the same way that you can use the code to get 99 lives in, well, Contra. No such luck in Gradius. Yes, the code is there, but the way it works is if you enter the code, you get all the power-ups, which basically helps you exactly once. When you die, and you will die, you're done. Now, to be clear, Gradius is a very fun game and definitely worth checking out. Unfortunately, it's also one which is really harder to learn the ropes of, and more difficult to succeed long-term at than Life Force is. I'd also say it's a game that definitely benefits more from playing with a controller that has turbo than some of the other games are. So, if you're playing this on a home console, on an actual NES, I recommend picking up either the NES Advantage or an NES Max. Number 16, Bobble by Taito. Bobble, aside from being something of a tongue twister of a name, is the second puzzle platformer of this episode, and one which is a bit more well known. And I also say it's one which really works best if you're playing a two-player. Unfortunately, because of how I'm doing these episodes, I can't really play it two-player, which kind of bums me out a little bit. Anyway, the player plays as one of two semi-amphibious animals, Bub and Bob, who must make their way through a whole bunch of levels by shooting enemies with bubbles, and then popping those bubbles to defeat the enemies, and causing them to turn into fruit. And then just do this until they reach the last level of the game. If you do this with two characters, then you get the best ending. The game design is great, it's really, really good. The controls are solid, the level designs are interesting, though some of the levels are considerably clunkier than others, particularly when they try to do really kind of artistic-y stuff, like making the level look like the main character of Dig Dug, or whoever this guy is supposed to be. But otherwise, it's a fun game. I definitely say this game is more fun when played with a friend than in single player, but still, if you can find a copy, it's worth picking up and checking out. Number 15, Xevious by Namco and developed for the NES by Bandai. Now, I love shoot-em-ups, and Xevious is an excellent shoot-em-up, but I gotta admit, as far as, well, this whole genre goes, I'm not good at shoot-em-up games. And of the games in this genre, Xevious is one of the ones which I feel like I'm the worst at. I've never even beaten the first level, even after playing for like hours on end. The controls are solid, the levels are intuitive, and when I die when I play Xevious, I feel like I died due to an error on my part as a player, not due to the game being cheap or otherwise basically being poorly designed. As it is, the NES version is very fun and is a really solid port of the arcade game. After much thought, though, I definitely say that this isn't my favorite shoot-em-up in this genre, though. That said, that's just a matter of personal taste on my part. I definitely say that if you find a copy of this game, definitely check it out and see if it is more to your taste. It's not hard to find copies of Xevious. The Namco arcade collections often have fairly well-ported versions of the arcade version, which is a lot like the NES version of the game. So if you have an opportunity to, I don't know, rent one of those games or play one at a friend's house or play Xevious itself in an arcade, that definitely is something worth trying to see, okay, is this something that's my speed and fits within my taste of a shoot-em-up? If it is, then definitely pick up this game. If you prefer something more like Gradius, with a broader variety of power-ups and that sort of thing, then probably skip it, because that's definitely... That's the division right there. Number 14, Robocop by Data East. Most film licensed games don't fare very well. Rambo, which I reviewed earlier this episode, is a really good example of that. Robocop for the NES, however, feels like something of an exception. The controls are solid, and though I'd say the controls seem to fare a bit better playing on my Xbox 360 controller's D-pad than I recall them working on my NES's D-pad back when the last time I played this on my NES, it still was surprisingly good. I found myself wanting to play it for considerably longer than I've ended up playing some of the other games here. And, well, I'd say definitely think about this, picking it up, at least if you find a copy somewhere for inexpensive. Although, again, judging by the D-pad feel and how that helped, I'd recommend trying the game with, the NES Max or the NES Advantage, rather than just a conventional NES controller. Less for turbo, more for the gameplay direction. Also, some of the more difficult cyborg enemies you encounter in the game, particularly the boss at the end of the first stage and some you encounter in Stage 2, City Hall, are manageable with turbo. Without turbo, I think they'd be... Not, I don't think, I know, they'd be considerably more of a slog. Number 13. Jackal by Konami. If you're watching this, you're probably familiar with the concept of a X with a Y game or movie. In this case, Jackal could probably be described as Choplifter with a Jeep, and thus being top-down. Still, the game is really darn fun, though as with most shooters, the game really benefits from being played with a controller that has turbo, and probably with either an arcade stick or an 8-directional controller like the NES Max. Still, this is a really good shump. I'm not the biggest fan of the term, but it works. People use it. People recognize it. It's a good shoot 'em up. It plays and controls really well. Definitely worth picking up and giving a shot. Number 12. Paperboy by Mindscape and Atari. This is a port of the somewhat successful arcade game. Now, the game itself plays okay at best, but has a major problem. The camera angle. The game is in a sort of isometric perspective, with the player basically in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. However, because of the fact that he's in the corner of the screen and how the camera angle is, you have very little reaction time for obstacles coming up. You can kind of move over onto the sidewalk for certain portions of the game, or parts of the levels by going up on driveways and that sort of thing, but it's still really tricky to do. And even then, by moving up on the sidewalk, consequently, you still get a lost reaction time because some of the obstacles that will attack you will be coming from houses, or driveways, or dog houses, or that sort of thing. And it'll take them less time for the dogs or whatever to come up and get you. Frankly, I did feel like I was doing better with this game this time than the last few dozen or more times I've played the game in the past. But I really can't tell if this is the controller I'm using, if this was a case of I just got lucky this time. I don't know. What I do know is I can't recommend this game. So, since we have 2-player and single-player titles this week, I'm giving 2 picks. On the 2-player front, I'm going with Bobble, in part because the game, benefits from being a 2-player because that's the only way to get the good ending, but also because the game, it's a really good, solid game, and I think you can get a lot out of playing it with your friends. Or of a friend, it's not a multi-tab game. For the single-player front, a little toss-up between Robocop and Jackal, but I think I'm going to go with Jackal. It's fun, it's a solid shooter. I like, in particular, also, how they adapt the choplifter mechanics, basically, for a top-down Jeep-based shooter. So, next time we finish up with the best of the rest, and I'll see you then. If you enjoyed the show, please click the like button or thumbs up button, and subscribe to this channel if you want an update for when the next episode comes out. I'll see you then.